Hey guys, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 3 beginner editing mistakes that I see in Luminar Neo all the time that can not only, I think, possibly send you down the wrong path in terms of getting a really beautiful outcome, but even potentially ruin the look of the overall photo. So I'm going to jump into that right now. Mistake number 1 is not starting with raw develop. Now, hopefully you shoot in raw. If not, I highly encourage you to begin doing so because raw files are just richer in terms of data and you can do more with them and you just get better overall quality of the results, right? So with a raw file, starting with develop raw is a foundational sort of step, right? It is the first and most important thing I think to be doing. So starting with develop raw, and the mistake that I often see is that people will either skip it or not spend enough time on it, but often they'll skip it and they'll just go to enhance AI and get in here to accent AI and say, you know what I want to do? I want to brighten it up and hey, it looks pretty good. Let's just keep going, but still a little bit dark. I know, I'll use Relight AI, another great AI tool. Let me brighten up near. That looks pretty good. Let me move the depth to the center of the photo, maybe slight brighter far, maybe not that much, maybe something like that. Here's what happens is you haven't controlled the light at all. You're letting the AI kind of do everything for you. And frankly, it doesn't do as good a job as you can do just by focusing on develop raw and using those tools. Here's an example of what I mean by that. If you look at the histogram, which I encourage you to turn on, but also if you hit the J key, you'll see those 2 little white dots have just appeared in the upper left and right corners of the histogram. But more importantly, you will see a big red splotch there in the sky and some blue here on the sides. Now, the red, this is an overlay that activates when you hit the J key. The red overlay is basically showing you, hey, these parts of the photo, anything in red, is blown out. The stuff in blue is a part of the photo where it's just too dark. It's basically completely black. Now, the truth is, I want a little bit of that black in my photos because I like to have a little bit of contrast, but what I don't really want is very much of that red. I want a very, very tiny amount, maybe none. And you can see I just used 2 incredibly powerful AI tools, but I used them too early. And that's what I mean. If you start with develop raw, you can control that a lot better. So let me go back over here to the edits tab and I'm going to get rid of those 2 tools. And I'm just going to jump into develop raw. That's my base photo. Let me turn off the J key. That's how the photo started. If I show you the before and the after, there's nothing there, right? So let's hit the J key and you can see I'm going to get more blue because the accent AI and the relight AI really brightened a lot of the dark spots. So it did take care of the shadow area, but look at that. That's basically the exact same size and position of that red splotch that I had before because I wasn't controlling the light. Accent AI, relight AI, great tools. I absolutely recommend using them. Don't use them first. Use them later in your edit for refinements. They're touch-up tools. Develop raw is a control tool. And so I'm going to go into develop raw and just get a little bit of smart contrast. When I start pulling down the highlights, guess what happens? That red stuff in the sky magically disappears. And then I start pulling up the shadows and guess what happens? That's right, I start getting rid of that blue where it says it's completely black. And so I'm now controlling the photo. And that's the difference between using develop raw first versus using those other tools first, is that I'm controlling the photo. Nothing wrong with the AI. I just don't want it to do everything for me. I use them as accent tools and touch-up tools later in my edits. I want to start by having massive amounts of control. Develop raw is where you're going to get that. So I've already got a better looking photo. There's a lot I could do here. I could come in here to color, and it was a beautiful sunset. This was in Copenhagen at a little place called, I'm going to say Nijhaven. That's how it's spelled, but I think it's pronounced something like Nyhavn. I don't know. I don't speak Danish, of course, and my accent and pronunciation is terrible, but you get it. There we go. I've done a little bit with color, and there's other color tools that I highly recommend that you use if you want to control color, and we're going to talk about color in a minute. I don't do a whole lot here in this color section. A little bit of temperature and tint, a very small amount of saturation or vibrance, and in fact, I rarely use the saturation. But the other thing about skipping develop raw and going straight to accent AI and relight AI is you skip some other very powerful stuff like optics, where I have the ability to come in on a raw file and get this automatic distortion correction, which it just did for me, which is fantastic. I can do de-vignetting if I have it and that sort of thing. And I also have transform, and I don't need it it on this photo, but like if you've got a building that you shot with a wide angle lens and you're kind of close, it's going to look like that building is leaning back, and that transform tool will help you fix that. So skipping develop raw, I think, is not a good idea because it really does give you that solid foundation. It's kind of like building a house. You want to pour the concrete and get the foundation built before you start adding walls or a roof or windows, doors, or ornamenting the house and making it look pretty, right? That's where color comes in. That's why I do color later and not here in develop raw, because I consider that a bit of an ornamentation. Ornamentation comes later in the edit process, in my opinion. So with develop raw, not only have I controlled the light really well and got those highlight areas under control, and you can see there's still a tiny little bit, it's not that big a deal, but if I needed to, I could come in here and take it down a little bit further. But I've controlled this image and I'm the boss of it, starting like that, and now it looks like that, and it just looks a whole lot better than when I use two other tools to allow those two tools to kind of do this stuff for me. So that's really number one, is not starting with develop raw and instead skipping kind of that foundational step and going straight into AI. So AI too early or too often or too much of it before you get to develop raw, not a good idea. Start with develop raw every single time. Okay, the second thing that I see that I consider a big mistake, and that is not refining the light. You can see I did a pretty good job here getting the light a bit more balanced. Again, photo started like that, now it looks like that. So the balancing of the light has occurred pretty well thanks to develop raw, but in my opinion, I'm not really ever done just with develop raw. There's one of two things that I will do after I've used develop raw. I will either go get super contrast, or I'll get develop a second time and come in and do some additional things. So if I get super contrast, I still want to do a little bit with those highlights. So I want to create a little bit more contrast in those highlights, maybe play with the balance. And you can see if I'm going left, I'm getting even more of those red splotches. So going to the right is going to further control that and give me a little bit more softer, kind of subtle look in those highlight areas. I'm going to come with midtones. I'm going to go a little bit like that. And I want to check this balance. Yeah, I kind of like it a little bit brighter. I'm trying to balance out the light a little bit. And I'm going to do the same as shadows. One more time, I'm going to check the balance. Go to the right, I'm getting more. You can see more of that blue. So it's good to leave that J key activated. And if you just take a look at the before and after here for super contrast, there it is before, there it is now. I actually think that looks fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the J key. All the highlights are completely under control. There's a little bit of complete black there on that left boat and the docks on the right hand side. I don't really usually care a whole lot if there's a little bit of black or even a little bit of the highlights. I just want to make sure it's not massive, but I have completely controlled the look of this photo in terms of balancing the light, which again, I consider that foundational. Develop raw is foundation step number one, absolutely essential and critical that I think you do that first. I'm personally a huge fan of using super contrast second. And so there it is. Without super contrast, that's what I got out of develop raw. There it is now, because contrast is the difference between dark and light. So you're still massaging, managing, balancing the light, whatever it is you want to call it, but you're doing it in each of the three major tonal areas, the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. That's what I think is so great about super contrast, and why I think it's honestly, it's one of the best tools in Luminar Neo, but it's not AI, it's not snazzy or fancy, it's just powerful, and I'll take power over like pizzazz any day. So there it is, before super contrast and after. And if I look at the entire photo, there it is before, there it is now, much more balanced and controlled. And that's again because I did the foundational step of develop raw first and got as much control out of that as I really could with just some of those sliders. Now, I didn't go into the tone curve, and there's a lot of power control there, and I highly recommend that you do that. And yes, I'm going to do a video about it. I've talked about that a couple of times, but instead I went straight to super contrast second. But I also could come in and use develop second, or hey, guess what? In a recent video, which you can check out there, I did an entire edit just with develop, and I used it 8 times. You can use develop again and again and again. So you can come in and mask it into certain areas and just do different things with it to really control the light. And that's what makes develop so powerful. So step number 2 is refining the light. And however you want to do that, that could be another instance of develop raw, or 7 more instances of develop raw if you like. It could be super contrast. It could be a little bit of accent AI. It could be some relight AI. I tend, again, to prefer to use those a little bit later in my edit because I'm still building my foundation. And to me, AI is more of an ornamentation kind of thing, whereas like develop raw or just develop and super contrast are more foundational. That's how I approach it. And that's why I think that second step of refining the light is super critical, and using either develop or super contrast is a super perfect reason to be using those next. Okay, and the third thing that I see that I consider a beginner mistake, and that is really just not controlling color. You see this color tool, and you've got it in develop as well, where you can adjust saturation or vibrance, and maybe you come in and you're like, well, it's a great sunset, I really want to pop that up and I kind of want to get that going, and yeah, that looks pretty good, but you know, you're not really being selective. If you notice, let me show you the before and after. Saturation and vibrance, these are global, right? So this is going to apply across the entire photo, and that boat on the left hand side, this big long one that's white, now when I let go, it's starting to pick up more color. It's more blue over here in the shadow, and it's more kind of pinkish, kind of orange along this side where more of the sunlight is hitting it. So you got to be careful that you can be a bit more selective about your colors. So for me, controlling color is about two things, really. It's using fewer tools, because people will come in and use color, and then they'll go get maybe a color harmony or toning, which I'll just show you, right? So you might come in and say, ooh, toning, yeah, highlights, let's get some, some nice color in there, and you get some nice color, and it looks fantastic. And I love color, trust me. I say that probably in every video, but I want to control the color. I don't want the color to take over or dominate the image. You might come into color harmony and say, brilliance, warmth, that sounds pretty good. Split color warmth, yeah, I want to warm up the warms and cool down the cools. And you can see very, very quickly, because there's so much power in these color tools in Luminar, which is one of the reasons it's my favorite tool, because again, I love color, but it's easy to just do too much with color. And so you really want to be careful that you're not in here overdoing it with all these different color tools and using too many of them, because you don't have to use that many color tools to really make an impact with color. You can use one or two instead of three or four. Additionally, the second piece, I started to say this a minute ago, the first thing is too many tools. The second piece is not really being selective about it. Now, you can be selective in a couple of different ways. You can mask saturation into specific areas. Maybe here you think on the right hand side, hey, there's plenty of saturation already in those buildings, and on the left there are buildings, I just really want to saturate the sky and the water. So you could isolate that with a mask. You could use Mask AI and isolate those areas and just saturate those. So that's one way to be selective. The other way, and I think they're both important, to be honest, the other way is to control specific colors, because if you saturate every color, then everything is over the top. But if you really just want to pop one color, I think generally speaking, that looks quite a bit better and more controlled than if you pop every color. So just a general saturation or vibrance slider is going to make every color get more intense. Whereas in the color tool, you have HSL, so you have these different color channels and saturation. So you might come in here and say, well, some of the blues and purples are maybe a little too much. Let me pull some of that down so it's not too unrealistic. Maybe I'll pull down the yellows a little bit, and maybe even the orange, but maybe I just want to pop the red. Every situation, every photo is going to be different, but keep in mind that controlling the colors, both in terms of fewer tools, not using 3 or 4 tools, but using 1 tool or 2 tools, but also by masking into specific areas. So, hey, I just want to mask it in the sky or water like I talked about. Or third reason can be just controlling specific colors and saturating. Hey, I really want the pinks to pop here, or the reds, and I don't really want to pop everything else because the reds are such a vibrant and dominant color that I want them to stand out, and everything else is still going to look fine. I'm not talking about desaturating significantly everything else, just not oversaturating everything, picking like a dominant color and going with that as kind of like your lead, if you will, in terms of color. So those are some things to think about, and those are the 3 different major beginner editing problems really that I see in Luminar Neo, and things that I think can really not just lead you down a path ending up with maybe a not necessarily a nice looking photo, but maybe even get you a really bad looking photo that's over the top, where someone's going to say, oh, that's clown vomit, or it's been photoshopped or whatever. And what you really want is a nice, natural, beautiful result where you have control and you take control of the image by using the tips that I've talked about in this video and making sure that you're in charge and you're not letting the software be in charge, because the software just does what you tell it to do. So if you just use an AI slider and you drag it to 100, it's going to do what it's supposed to do. And that doesn't mean it's a bad tool. It just means that you're overusing it. So just be careful, go slowly, and be sort of methodical, for lack of a better word, about it. Focus on the things that I've talked about here, refining the light and that sort of thing, and you'll end up with a beautiful end result. And that's how it went in this one, my friends. Hope this gives you some ideas and some things to think about. And I'll be back soon with more videos here on Luminar Neo and other things. So thanks for watching. You guys take care of yourselves out there, my friends. I'll see you soon. And until then, adios.